everyone, welcome back to Procrastinate with Books. In today's episode of this video, we'll be covering up all the books that I've read this February in quite some detail, and by all I mean I've read quite a lot. So without any further ado, let's just grab something to eat or drink and hop in further for the video. There has been a small change in the format of this video, so rather than going with my least rated books to my top rated books, this time around I'm going genre wise. So for each genre that I have read, I have classified into different shelves and I'll be addressing them one by one. The first book that we'll be talking about today is in the non-fiction category. In that, I have The Secret History of Bigfoot. Here, the author actually compiles all his experiences that he went through while he was actually researching on the topic of Bigfoot, and he has closely mentioned all the myths and legends that associate with this topic. And you might feel that some of the places the names might be different. For some areas it's Bigfoot, for other areas it's Yeti, but the creature moreover resembles the same concept. And while no one has actually grabbed a hold of significant evidence of that personality in life form, there have been different forms of evidences that they do exist still, and he has carried out his own research and he has illustrated all those things beautifully in this narrative down. Next book in my non-fiction category is This Smokes and Ashes by Amitabh Ghosh, and this is yet another exemplary written book by him. He has already written multiple books on topics related to opium. The Poppy series by him, it's a trilogy, is yet another book that people love to explore. This time around he came out right planned and just shared all the truths with unfiltered versions of them, and that is why it is not a book that anyone and everyone can read. I think people who have the habit of gulping down bitter truths without any filtered versions or any steaming process around it, I think they would actually enjoy it. The story here is revolving around the various segments of addictive substances, primarily around opium, but in the initial stages it also discusses the different forms of addictive substances such as cocaine, heroin, and how they are basically extracted. It's all mentioned down clearly in there. It showcases you the true face of how opium has created and destroyed multiple empires, cities, and even nations for a very long period of time, and how its effects are still significant in the world that we are currently living in. Our next book is The Spice Maker's Secret in the historical fiction category, and this one was specifically close to my heart because of its narration from South Indian region. So any books based on India actually touch your hearts very deeply. If you are an Indian reader yourself, then you would be able to associate with a lot of concepts and topics that are addressed in the book, especially from the segment of the caste system that is brooding deep in our society. I think the book addresses that aspect pretty well. Talking about the story plot, it's about a very young girl who was born and her parents died immediately after. So she grew up with her Aji and learned the different flavors and cuisines of India and how to make different kinds of masalas to make just the right tinge in your heart around the food industry. And apart from that, she grows up to be a brilliant student, and while she wants to have a career, she is left around doing some bargains and is stuck around in a different place. But still, that zest in her to do something in the world, to make a significant impact in the world, is still hammering in her chest and not just letting her be in peace. And that's where this whole story will lead you. I also read one poetry book in here for the month of February, but it was pretty okay. I did find a few favorite lines, a few good poetries, but overall I think it was a good some one-time read. I'm not really grabbing onto this book quite a lot, and honestly I finished this book in multiple settings, and this is not something that I would probably gravitate towards again. Now let's move to the murder mystery segment. The first book in here is Murder by Candlelight, and this is very much like the Agatha Christie themed sort of a book where a murder happens and next day the investigators who are there in town would probably start investigating the whole scenario and how things would fall. Even the approach of addressing the criminal is pretty similar to Agatha Christie's style, wherein you actually evaluate each person who has went in that room or had any role in form of conversation, contact of the victim, and then they will just try to solve the case. It was a pretty easy peasy cozy mystery for me that I just read because I was feeling very heavy and I did not want anything more mind divulging to be read into. Another mystery thriller book that I read was You'll Never Know I'm Here. This is about six book influencers. So obviously I had to pick this up as soon as I saw it on NetGalley. And this book is based out about these book influencers who create a group on their Bookstagram platform and then start chatting with each other. And because they've been friends for a very long time, they decide to go out over a weekend, meet each other, and probably spend some time reading and doing book photo shoots and other things like that, just for a cozy weekend getaway. But things obviously turned upside down when one of the hosts who tried to actually initiate this whole idea is not coming over the weekend, and instead someone else is there. And now, while they're actually playing a game, some dark secrets start revealing themselves, and now people are not confident about what's really going on in front of their eyes because it's very mystical after that. Now, overall, pretty good book, great mystery build up, great concept from the book influences point of view as well. I think it addressed those aspects of creating books, editing pics, and all the background stories that we as book influencers go through pretty well into the story. However, I do not really agree pretty much with the book title. I don't know. It could have been titled something else much more suited to the overall story rather than the title that's up here. Our next book in the thriller mystery category is, well, it's not only a mystery, it's also somewhere in the contemporary world built up. So I would like you to keep that aspect in mind as well. But otherwise, I freaking love this book. It was so good. And that coming from a fantasy lover means it was actually good at its mystery build up. Now, the story here from plotline aspect is based around that 1% Richie Rich of the world who goes to all the galas, auctions, and everything. And basically, they point their fingers at something and they just get it. That's what the Richie Rich of the world do. And that within focuses a girl who is trying to fit in with her so rich besties, and they are studying together at Yale, and the whole growing up into an age where they are actually trying to do something for themselves after colleges. They're trying to figure out different careers for themselves, and one of the roommates actually dies suddenly. And while all of them are grief hitted, the rest of them are not as much attached as the protagonist in the story. And then onwards, you actually follow her story from her point of view, entering into what different things these Richards actually do. Our next category would be the middle grade category. Now, within this, the first book that I have is a graphic novel, Bad Dreams in the Night, which is compilation of multiple short stories that are presented in an enigmatic yet horrific way. These are mostly horror stories that are actually presented to you in graphic ways, but they all revolve around everyday lives. Example, someone is going to the metro for work, and they board the metro and lights flicker out and it's immediately empty except 2 3 people in there, and then something happens. Similarly, it's been raining for so many days and the person is very hungry and the road transport and everything is blocked up, and they just go to the nearby restaurant with this pretty grim looking. They start eating it and things happen, which was very yucky. But otherwise, the stories are so open ended that it's absolutely left for the reader's imagination to conclude the story of what would happen after this. Oh my god, I absolutely enjoyed this one, and I think even children can enjoy this one very easily. Our next book is the second part in Fanny Fitzpatrick series, and this is The Brothers Problem. This is the second book after My Best Friend Athena, where a trio of best friends going to school actually discover that one of their best friends is actually an ancient Greek goddess reincarnated into a childish version, or basically that she has embodied herself in a childlike person so that she can just continue to exist in mortal realms. And beyond that, now this time around there's a new brother that has come in visiting, and it's about his reckless behavior all around the year and the kind of troubles that he keeps creating, and how Fanny will now play a role to actually extract them out of these troubles and get things straightened out. The Luminous Life of Lucy Landry, another great middle grade book. I did enjoy most part of it. It was adventurous, it was uplifting from various aspects of life, but it was also a little bit notorious, if I must say. The story here is about a very young girl who loses her parent, the only parent who was surviving her dad, and he used to talk about all the mysteries of different ships across the sea voyages that he used to go to, and one hidden necklace in particular that was lost forever. After losing her dad, she's sent off to live on a lighthouse with a family who's looking after the lighthouse, and they basically take care of all the daily duties and rituals that are supposed to be performed there. And there she comes across an opportunity to re-dig this hidden necklace mystery, but there could be a possibility that other people are also looking for it for many years now, and she really doesn't want anyone else to grab it. So maybe she might get a bit more notorious and do something that she might later regret just to get the hold of the necklace. Marnie Midnight and the Moon Mystery has been a very charmatic, enigmatic story. If I talk about the adventures, especially related to the animal kingdom in which it's based out in the insect kingdom, where all the insects go to this very chivalrous academy, and she finally gets to go there, and she's very excited that she'll be going to the school and learning new things about the moon. And it's basically the moon is her goal, and she admires it like a person individually, and she always wanted to go there, and now she simply wants to uncover all the mysteries related to it. However, upon landing upon the academy, she learns that people don't really talk that freely about this topic, and there are different hidden secrets that might be unknown to her, and now she just feels there is something off and she is going to correct it all. Our next category is magical realism, and within that, the first book that we have is What Blooms in Dust, and this is the story of a person named Jeremiah, his childhood, his adulthood, and the corrective course of action for his life. Now, the story is narrated in dual point of views, in dual timelines. So, one aspect will be narrated in the past when he was born and what things happened at that point of view. The other narration is in the present time that he's currently living in as an adult. Now, while he was a child, he had some specific abilities because of which he would always be able to call upon the outcome of the flip of a coin. And he, because of that, started feeling that he had some godly powers that he could decide the fate of any person in the life. And then things progressed from there, and he did something that he shouldn't have, and he was sent to jail. Now, while he was actually sentenced for death on an electrical chair, something very strange happened at that point of time, and he got rescued from that position. And so somehow he landed back in his childhood town that was discovered by his parents. And now things have started to happen again in similar consequential manner. There are different things that is happening there. The story overall challenges your outlook towards life, and it gets really creepy from that position onwards. So I think it will be best suited if you read it with an open mind. The next book that we have is The Magic All Around Us, and though some of you might enjoy the story a lot, if you are looking for brain-hinging, questionable storylines, various plot twists, etc., I don't think this would be for you, because the storyline in here glides like butter, like it's very smooth. You will be able to predict a lot of outcomes in the story way far from when they actually happen, because you can see those wires working and you just know that this is going to happen next. And it does happen, but the whimsical feel of the story, the character names such as Penelope, Lilith, and all those things actually create a very enigmatic aspect around it, and it did feel whimsical while I was reading it. Will you miss really something if you don't read it? Probably not, but if you actually read it, will you feel really good about it? Definitely yes. Now let's move ahead to my favorite category, which is fantasy. Now I must say that I have both good news and bad news, so I would like you to keep your fingers crossed. Moving ahead to the first book that I have, this was a big disappointment. I had to DNF it at a very beginning level, I think around 13% or 17% of the book across, because it was too smutty for my taste, and I don't really enjoy reading smutty books. I simply picked this up for the cover purposes because I had a prompt during the February reading prompt which addressed to reading a book with Rose on the cover for Rose Day prompt, and that's why I actually read it. But it did feel pretty shitty writing. I don't know. The whole plot was pretty intriguing, from witches, werewolves, and magical aspect, but everything that was going in there with multiple mating and all those sorts of scenarios just felt cheap to me. Our next book, Dead Things Are Closer Than They Appear, is something that I would recommend to people who can do with a close beginning and a little bit of slow build-up in the world build-up section, because this was a little bit of slow read and I was struggling to get along with the story for the first 40% of it. Talking about storyline, it's about the city where there are different people who have certain magical abilities. Now, though the normal people think that those powers have vanished years and centuries ago and no longer anyone actually has that powers, the true guardians of those powers actually keep themselves hidden in a very low profile manner within the city. But someone from the revolution is trying to hunt them down and gain all the access to the powers. And after boom, that rattled out the whole city. These guardians have now started disappearing left and right and center, and there's this young girl whose brother is also a guardian, and she's simply trying to get back to her brother, and within the course of that she's discovering so many new things like zombies too. So if you're in for a Resident Evil sort of a mood, I will recommend you to pick this one up. Our next book, A Tempest of Tea, is one of the most anticipated books of the year by many people, including me, and that's why it always had high expectations. Did it meet up to those bars? Probably yes, for most aspect, not for one single aspect. But otherwise, the story in here is about vampires living in the city, and they have their own clan and club basically, from where they regulate the different things, as they have infiltrated the actual kingdom rules, regulations, and all sorts, so that they can feed upon as they choose and still hide out in plain sight. Now, without breaking into a lot of details about the story and the plot lines, let me just say that the writing was obviously good. There were some questionable areas where I felt a little cringy because of the writing too, so I think I was a bit on and off with the writing style of the author. The characters were vividly painted into beautiful versions of themselves, and few of the protagonists has a great build-up with overall characters. They showcase their flaws, their strengths, and also an ability to show emotion as a human slash something. What did work perfectly for me was the way the book ended. It has an open ending sort of thing where you will be left out questioning everything that you have read so far, and I personally had to reread the last 3 chapters yet again just to gain that full closure for myself. To Cage a God was, I think, my second most favorite book in the fantasy segment, and probably around the month as well. No, third favorite around the month, because the next one was my top favorite and then the Fortune Seller. Anyways, the reason why it worked out so well is because the way the whole world build up acted upon in here, with all the kingdoms and the nomenclatures of God and the godly powers that is embodied into the human beings, so that they have special powers, is created very beautifully. And rather than actually explaining it out to you, I would recommend you to read the blurb, and if that attracts you, just hop in. It's really beautiful in there. I also did read a little bit of cool off period just after reading this book, because it was too much to take care, but it was also enjoyable. One of the reasons that I did enjoy this so much was because of the protagonist's character build-up. Now, usually what we see is someone with a lot of power, especially in the female category, who is against the kingdom, revolting against certain things that they do, are often seen making foolish decisions just out of rage. And that did not happen here. She was very cool-minded and made conscious decisions, which I actually did enjoy reading. And besides this, there is an additional angle of LGBTQ into the story, which actually adds to the various layers of depth that the story has created. And then there's this whole angle where there's another girl against the protagonist who she thinks will be her nemesis, but she ends up into just another direction altogether, and it was so good to read that. This is the last book that I read for February, my top rated book of this month, total 5 out of 5 stars. It's the second book in Letters of Enchantment by Rebecca Ross, and it has truly enchanted me. After reading the first book in January for my book club pick, I knew I had to pick this up, especially because of the cliffhanger ending that this book had. Now, after Divine Rivals, looking at all the rivalry feeling that transformed into a love angle between Roman and Iris, I knew I had to understand what's going to happen next to the two of them, and that's why I had to pick this up. The story in here actually revolves into an after effect of how Roman wakes up and what things actually happen after that, and despite everything that's happening around them, these two just find a way to come back together, and just looking at those tugs and pulls that's happening between them was really nice, especially in reading format. I also got to see a lot of godly angle in the second part, which was slightly missing in the first part. It almost felt like a historical fiction romance rather than a fantasy historical fiction, because there was not enough mention of the gods in there. Here you actually see gods in different roles and the strategies that they are operating towards the natural human world. So that was something that actually made it good to read. And that was all the books that I read this month, and divided obviously into different categories. Let me know down in the comments, have you read any of these books so far, or are you planning to read them? How did your February go? And I'll catch up with you in my next video. Until then, keep your coffee strong and your TBRs long. Goodbye!